Okay. Yes, we are already online. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our next session of Eurasia Talks. And to present today's guest and speaker and to present today's topic, I will ask our co-host Ishik Bonafont to do this. So Ishik Hoca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julia. We're honored to host Assistant Professor Dr. Hélène Thibault, who currently holds a job at the Political Science and International Relations Department at Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan. She's specialized in ethnography, religion, secularism, and Soviet legacy. And her research focus covers the study of religious identities, especially the growing importance of Islam within Central Asian societies since independence. But I've asked you to go check Hélène's personal website. She really has a diverse research interest, and maybe we'll type it later, Dr. Hélène Thibault. She kind of inspired me to have my own, and there you can see the diversity of her focus. And her current research project is basically on changing matrimonial arrangements, especially polygyny in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, I guess, partly. So I guess this is a very timely topic for all societies of Eurasia, where gender relations are, precarious or sensitive. So I'm really curious of what Hélène has to say. Hélène, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me to this great initiative of Eurasian Studies Talks. Thanks for Karabuk University and Mitu for inviting me. So I will share a PowerPoint. I will talk hopefully for 25 minutes, I think I timed it was about, and present some of my findings. If I can share my screen.
Okay, and yes, while this, I just wanted to remind our participants, so please mute your microphones during the presentation, and you can write your questions directly to the chat section, and then after the presentation, of course, we will discuss them. So thank you very much.
Okay, so what I'm presenting today is actually not a research paper per se, nor a book that has been published. It's more of a combination of two research projects that I'm currently working on, as Ishik mentioned, polygyny, as well as sex work, and most particularly male sex work. So we could say that this is a book in the making that I'm talking about today. The title is a bit catchy for obvious advertisement purposes, but the topic is really about male sex work and polygyny. And so before I start, I just want to mention that those two things, and that's why in the description of the talk, I mentioned Kazakhstan laissez-faire attitude towards some social dynamics that are related to gender and sexuality, which are polygyny and sex work. So what is quite interesting, so laissez-faire in the sense that the legal status of those two social phenomena, I'm not sure how to call that, those two social objects, the legal status is a bit equivocal because unlike its neighbors, Kazakhstan decriminalized prostitution in 2001, and this is now an administrative offense. So prostitution is legal as long as is tolerated, as long as it is not in an organized way, such as in a brothel, for instance. So then if a person is caught selling sex in a brothel, this person can receive a fine, and the fine is normally not that high, something around $100. So there's one thing about sex work. So that's a particularity in the region. And Kazakhstan has also decriminalized polygyny in 1998, something that happened very quietly, that didn't that wasn't the object of a lot of debates in the parliament, for instance. However, these both sex work and polygyny are not legal per se, so they're tolerated, and nothing in the law can criminalize those behaviors, but at the same time they're not officially recognized. So a sex worker cannot declare its revenues, his or her revenues, for instance. And the law on marriage and family, what is called in the former Soviet Union as ZAKS, this is a Russian acronym, so that the state can register only one marriage, marriage to one partner only. Yet there were some attempts to legalize polygyny in 2001 and 2008, which is also quite unusual for the region. There were failed attempts, and I will go deeper into this later as for the reasons why it wasn't fully legalized. So this sort of very, could we say, negligent or complacent attitudes towards those two practices is quite puzzling, because the literature shows that in general, conservative states tend to have, authoritarian states tend to have socially conservative policies. This is the case, well, the issue of polygyny could be that its legalization could be considered like a conservative move, but at the same time, some people argue that it would actually protect women and children involved in those marriages. So it could be seen either as a conservative law or a progressive one. But what is quite interesting is that not only is this, well, one paradox, and the second one is the legacy of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was at some point of its history, was a totalitarian state, which was very much involved in the regulation of in the regulations of social dynamics, and even very much involved in the regulations of people's private lives. So this legacy is heavy in many regards in the legislation in many former post-Soviet states. But it seems like Kazakhstan just got rid of those aspects, which is quite interesting in itself. And I will come back a little bit on the Soviet legacy in a moment. So these two attitudes, towards these two social objects, for the lack of a better term, if you have one, please tell me if you have a suggestion. So this combined to also paradoxical attitudes towards marriage and sexuality in Kazakhstan, which I will also dig into, sort of made me think of the reasons why Kazakhstan has adopted those policies or hasn't, or is just sort of continuing the status quo of the equivocal local status of those two objects. So when I mentioned the legacy of the Soviet Union, so indeed the USSR was very much involved in the micromanagement of its citizens. And even though the Soviet gender emancipation project led to major transformations of the society, it remained a relatively conservative project driven by strict heteronormative norms. And that sexuality was not something that was necessarily encouraged and talked about. I'm sure a lot of people have heard the anecdote в СССР «Секса нет». I actually have a t-shirt of that. And this is something that even young people today say, even though they haven't lived in the USSR. So this is something taboo that shouldn't be discussed in public. So that's one of the legacies. And after independence, I'll go quickly here because I want to dig deeper into contemporary projects. So forgive me for not going in depth into this, but nationalist secular ideologies have promoted a form of have promoted traditional values that emphasize traditional gender roles. For instance, again, strong binary divisions of what men and women, what masculinity is, femininity is. And in Kazakhstan in particular, but not in particular, I would say, this is across the region, female modesty and obedience are often emphasized, and I will show a few examples of that in a moment. So the official narratives is relatively conservative, but again, there are degrees to this, and I will bring a lot of nuances to this claim. But overall, sexuality remains taboo, although there are also nuances to bring to this. So here this is an example. Uyat in Kazakh and Kyrgyz languages means shame. So Uyatman is some kind of a shame patrol person, normally a man, who wants to protect national values. So here you have an example. So this man, Talgat Shaltayev, made this. So this is in the center of Astana, Nur-Sultan, the capital of Kazakhstan. So he saw they are sort of the Romeo and Juliet of Kazakh literature in the center of the city, and he thought she was indecent, so he covered her and then took a picture of himself, posted it online. It created a lot of reaction, some support, some mockery. It seems a bit fruitless to cover a statue, but yeah. So it created talks about discussions about who should protect national values, what are national values, why is this unacceptable, etc. So this is just one example. Obviously, he's not very organized, but he's not the only one. There were groups that in recent years have protested against what they see as a threat to masculinity and femininity in Kazakhstan. So there was some backlash regarding a K-pop group, 1991. If you heard, we can talk about it in the discussions. This is another example this is a screenshot from a clip that came out in 2020, as you can see. This clip created a lot of backlash, as the title suggests. This short clip was made by a private company in Shymkent, and this is the third largest city of Kazakhstan in the south, a region that is considered more conservative. And in the video, basically, this young woman is talking on the phone. She's hailing a taxi. This car stops, and she sits. She doesn't pay attention, and the driver pretends to be a taxi driver, but basically what he wants to do is to explain her that he thought she was a prostitute because of the way she's dressed. And then when she enters, he asks how much, and she thinks this is about the fare of the taxi, but it isn't. And then he lectures her about the way she dresses, and then she leaves the car ashamed and embarrassed. So this created a lot of backlash, and it was problematic because the video was made by a private company, but with the support of the office of the mayor of Shymkent. So this is just one example among others that female modesty is encouraged or promoted. However, in parallel to that, we also have what I called in my research on male sex work. I used a concept elaborated by Gradskova and two other scholars in a recent book on sexuality in the former Soviet Union, revolutions of intimacy. Because what we see in Kazakhstan, so they're parallel, but maybe more than multi-layered processes, different processes going on in terms of what is happening in the social sphere. And in Kazakhstan, and I will mention that in a moment, there are some indicators that prove that there is a liberalization of social mores, sexual emancipation, perhaps informed by foreign media, globalization. And we see it, for instance, in the high rate of divorces, so close to 35% of marriages end in a divorce. The first cause of divorce that is mentioned, according to a recent survey, is the intervention of relatives in couples' lives. So this is the in-laws. Many people live with their parents or grandparents. So this is the first cause of divorce in Kazakhstan. And this is significant for my research in polygyny, which I will talk about in a moment. So tolerance for casual sex, as you can see here, this is a recent survey from the World Value Survey, is quite high in comparison to Kazakhstan, to Kyrgyzstan. This is almost half of people think that, I mean, this is actually, I've used intolerance, the first intolerance towards casual sex. And I've included Turkey because we have a Turkish audience today. So it's quite interesting to see the differences. I've put Germany there, but Germany is a bit of an outlier in Western Europe. In Denmark or Sweden, tolerance for casual sex is a lot higher, but it gives an indicator nevertheless. So we see Kazakhstan is a bit of an outlier in the region, at least. And when it comes to polygyny, polygyny is quite common, but like sex work, because it's not legal, there are no official numbers, and it's hard to determine the extent of it. But it's relatively common, probably especially among high-level officials, because you need some money to support a second or third wife. Kazakhstani demographer Latimov said that, Latimov or Tatimov? Said that it concerned probably 2% of Kazakhstani families. An imam from Almaty mentioned that 10% of nikah, which is Islamic marriage, 10% that are performed at the mosque involve tokals. Tokal is a word in Kazakh and Kyrgyz that refers to a second wife, or could be third wife, but not the first official wife. And as you can see from this screenshot of mainstream media, Nur-KZ, this is discussed quite openly in Kazakhstan, which is a bit of a paradox again, because a lot of people who are involved in polygynous relationships do not necessarily talk about it openly, but in the media, they love some kind of polygyny or tokal stories. So here it says the 7 most famous tokals in Kazakhstan, right? So it's even like glamorous in a way, because it involves rich people. And then even more surprising was this recently. This is from Caravan.kz, also a quite mainstream media. And they made this very provocative headline, a boy for a big shot. So Arashka is a word in Kazakh that refers to an older, powerful man, right? So I translated as big shot. It's just the best I could come up with. So here again, we see something like quite glamorous. So this man, Nurlan, I cannot see his name right now, Alim Khojayev, is a hairdresser who is quite famous in Kazakhstan. And he has a very glamorous lifestyle, and people accuse him of being the tokal boy of somebody famous. It's not necessarily related to polygyny, but here the story came up because of this ex-deputy Bakhut Sizdikova, who made this sort of provocative, scandalous claim that before big shots had second wives and now they have boys. So that's something that is around in Kazakhstan, those discussions. And this is even more surprising given that tolerance for homosexuality in Kazakhstan is quite low. But in my research, polygyny is not that glamorous because, well, I don't have access to those kind of powerful people. They don't want to do interviews with me, I guess. So I interview ordinary people. So, and the first thing that comes to mind when I interview people, when the first thing they mention is that polygyny is part of Kazakh tradition. And it's part of pre-Islamic Kazakh traditions and part of Islam, right? Because Islam allows men to have more wives. However, the people I've interviewed, they, except for one person, they were not religious. They self-identified as Muslims, but they were not practicing Islam. And they were quite not particularly conservative. So we should nuance that. And I will provide also support indications that Muslims do not necessarily support polygyny in Kazakhstan. There's a demographic aspect. A lot of people claim that polygyny is necessary because Kazakhstan has a demographic problem. I mean, this is not really true because population is growing every year, but I think it comes from the fact that a lot of Kazakhs are always think of the Soviet times when they were Kazakhs were a minority in Kazakhstan and then needed more Kazakh babies, basically. Well, although the science is not really clear about whether or not polygynous societies have higher fertility rates. The other aspect is economic conditions, so that women decide to become second wives because they are struggling financially. That's one possibility, definitely, especially if you remember the high rate of divorce. So there are a lot of divorcees, a lot of women who are single mothers, and they might indeed find this arrangement useful for them. But I need to nuance that again, and I will do it in a moment. But before I talk about desire for independence, internal migration also might explain why polygyny appear to be increasing in Kazakhstan, because people migrate a lot internally. They move to the big cities, to Nur-Sultan, which is growing every year, Almaty as well, and they are separated from their families. So men could be separated from their first wife and children, and then they might find a new partner in the new city they live in. Or women who are separated from their families, their parents, for instance, they move to a different city and then can engage in a polygynous relationship, and their family wouldn't know because they are not around and monitored like they would if they would be in their hometown. And finally, something quite counterintuitive, I would say, and I think this is the strongest contribution I make to the study of polygyny in Central Asia, is women's desire for independence. Because polygyny is often seen as something that is detrimental to women. But from the women I've interviewed, they were quite happy about this arrangement of being a second wife. Most of them were divorcees, and they were very happy to have a husband only when they needed to and not full time. So this was something, they enjoyed the freedom of this kind of relationship. And if you remember, again, the divorce rates and the reason why people divorce is the relatives' influence in people's lives. And as second wives, women are not involved with the in-laws, right? So they have their own apartment, they live separately, and their husband visits them when he wants to. Of course, there are a lot of problems connected to jealousy, but at the same time, a lot of women I've interviewed mentioned that they really enjoyed this me time that they had. And at the symbolic level, at the political level, polygyny is, as I mentioned, tolerated, but sometimes it's even by the authorities even encouraged or discussed. The Muftiat, for instance, does not require marriage papers to perform the nikah at the mosque. And they have even publications online and at the mosque where they promote and encourage polygyny. So I have a book that is distributed to newlyweds, and there's one section is polygyny in Islam. So this book is published by the Muftiat of Kazakhstan, which is a quasi official clergy in Kazakhstan. Politicians, some of them high-profile politicians, mention their second or third wife. So this hasn't been. It's still a taboo, but some politicians have mentioned that in the past. Nursultan Nazarbayev, the first president of Kazakhstan, former president, and he has a title of first president, recently was interviewed on TV and was asked about his relationships to women. And he made this a bit of cryptic answer. You might think that my translation is not very good, but his words were very cryptic in a way. So it's not clear if he refers to his own experience of relationships with women, because he didn't say my first love, my second love, or second, but he said вторая жена, третья жена, женщина. He didn't use the word жена. He used the word женщина. So, but at the same time, he's sort of backing up, not backing up, but normalizing polygyny in a way. So this is, again, at the symbolic level, quite interesting. Attitudes towards polygyny, however, in the society are, people are not really in favor of polygyny. As you can see here, this is a survey that I commissioned in 2019, 2025 respondents, and that's why I mentioned, I argue that it's not really a religious issue, because Muslims are not more likely, not to a significant extent, likely to support the legalization of polygyny in Kazakhstan, even if the question was framed in terms of protecting women's rights. So men are a bit more likely to support, as you can see, even Christian men, right? So that's quite interesting. So you see that the level of support for polygyny is really low, because in my focus groups, a lot of people associate polygyny with Islam, with Sharia. As soon as you mention polygyny, they said, what is this? Are we going to live in a Sharia country? Or so this, the violation of secular principle of the state associated with polygyny is a very strong sentiment among a lot of people. I want to move on to sex work, a topic that I've just started working on. I prepared an article, it's under peer review now, and particularly male sex work, which again says something about the unique character of Kazakhstan. So tolerance for sex work is relatively high, again, in comparison to Kyrgyzstan, Turkey, and I included Germany as a comparison, a European country. So quite high in the region. Yeah, I mean, sex work is often all around the world. It's not something that people are really comfortable with. So yeah, but there are variations, obviously. And what I found the most interesting, the reason why I started investigating male sex work is after I saw this article from Tengri News. This is again a major outlet in Kazakhstan. This man, Nurlan Nurpeisov, is a relatively known businessman in Kazakhstan, and he was reacting on his Facebook. He was reacting on the arrest of a male sex worker in Nur-Sultan who was caught, and because he was working in a brothel, and he was fined. But then he made this post, which was picked up by Tengri News and made into a news. So he said very harsh words against Kazakhstani men. So this post was surprising in many regards, because basically he's criticizing Kazakhstani men. He says that, well, male sex work is okay and we should support it because Kazakhstani men are inadequate, because they are impotent, very harsh criticism. And then he says, women, so there's an acknowledgement that women need sex, right? And he also added that, I cut that part, but also because it was too long, but he added that women need sex, otherwise they will develop diseases, which again, hasn't really found, doesn't have a scientific backup for that. But if they need sex, and they should have sex, but if they do it, then better to go to a professional than to ruin your reputation by having casual sex with strangers or acquaintances. So this was quite interesting in many regards. And then I started looking into this. News report in Kazakhstan have also emphasized the increased visibility of sex work in Kazakhstan. So many news outlets reported on that. And then I started to look at the literature, and the overall, the literature around the world, well, of course, female sex work, which is the largest body of sex work, I mean, there are a lot more sex workers who are females than males. But when male sex work is studied, is 90% of the time homosexual sex work, right? So men offering sexual services to men. And here I have a quote from a Turkish researcher who, in a book about male sex work around the world, in this book, among 25 chapters, there was not a single chapter about heterosexual male sex work. And the only time it was mentioned, it was by this Turkish author who mentioned that in the course of a decades-long research, he has never come across this in Turkey. Maybe it exists, but he hasn't seen it. So in the course of a 2 months research, I've discovered that it's quite prevalent in Kazakhstan. So I have conducted a research on one very popular website in Kazakhstan that advertises sex services. So there are 3 categories of sex workers. So females, they're called fairies for some reason. And then you have males or guys, young men, and trans, which was also surprising. Again, I didn't expect to see a trans category in that. So the advertisements on this website, as you can see, are the majority of them are posted by female sex workers, but there are also a lot posted by male workers. And among them, most men offer services to women only. So these are the overall ads of the website. And then you have here the sample that I took. I took a sample of 100 in the 2 major cities of Kazakhstan. The other cities are also covered, but I didn't include them here. The services that are offered are overwhelmingly heterosexual, for women only. And I think, so there's a difference, you might think, between the offer and the demand. But I think we can reasonably assume that these sex workers have a clientele. However, monetary gain seems to not always be the sole motivation of male sex workers, because some of them advertise services for free. One of them even said that he will provide pizza. I'm not joking. This was a real ad. But I mean, overall, the services should be paid, but not always. Some of them advertise for free. So it's a way to get easy, casual sex, I suppose. And what is interesting is that it remains taboo because I've come across only 1 or 2 escorts who actually show their faces there. And if you look at the literature around the world, it's still faces. Normally people, sex workers, will provide photos of their faces. So that's unusual for Kazakhstan, that no one is recognizable. And what is interesting is that female sexuality should remain taboo because the female sex workers, it's like a Google reviews you can leave on the site. You can access the site without any account, but if you want to leave a comment, you need to create an account. I didn't, but you can see the reviews nevertheless. So female sex workers have a lot of reviews, whereas male sex workers barely have any comments. So that's one way of showing, it says something about the fact that women don't really brag about their sexual experiences on the website, even if it's completely anonymous. So I want to turn now to potential explanations as to why this is happening. As I said, this is not a firm argument that I'm making. It's more of a book in the making. I'm just brainstorming here. But the reasons why, for instance, sex work might be so unregulated in Kazakhstan, it could be because ambiguity is preferable to precision. The legalization of sex work would probably be a quite unpopular law in Kazakhstan, I believe, even if tolerance is a bit high. it's still a bit taboo. If you look at the comments behind under articles that mention prostitutions or prostitute, people are very intolerant to that, and this is something shameful, right? And the third point here is sexual blackmail, compromat. Compromat is not always sexual, it's not always related to sex, but it can be. This is a technique that is well used in Russia, for instance. I don't have any evidence that this is used in Kazakhstan, but it doesn't mean that I haven't looked into this very carefully, and I'm sure there could be examples that this is if it was entirely legal, then it wouldn't be compromising, right? So that's just one hypothesis, because it's so because it's common in Russia. We can think maybe that this is also happening in Kazakhstan. And finally, in terms of legitimation, the argument about polygyny. So as we could see, polygyny is not very popular in the population. This is not a popular idea to legalize it. When there were attempts to legalize it, there was a lot of public discussions and a lot of backlash, actually. So again, legalizing it might not be an option because of the unpopularity of that law. And I have a research, and I'm supervising an MA student who is writing on issues of polygyny, and she will argue, forthcoming, that actually it might be used to divert the attention from other scandals, political scandals. So that's quite interesting to see, for instance, that when the legalization of polygyny was initiated was at key moments of a political crisis. So that might be one way of instrumentalizing those controversial issues and keeping it vague. And again, ambiguity is preferable to precision. And finally, the fact that it is so widespread, not widespread, but widely discussed in the media, and as we know, the freedom of media is well, problematic in Kazakhstan. But the fact that it's so widely discussed might indicate that there's an implicit transformation of those extramarital relations into something legitimate. So there's the reason why it's so widely discussed is to sort of legitimize this further, because as we know, it's still a taboo in Kazakhstan, even though it's widespread. And finally, so some conclusions about more broader conclusions is my goal with this research and about sex work and about polygyny is to, well, acknowledge the complexity of the gender order, the intersection of changing gender norms, the Soviet legacy and political interests, and also sort of to move away from the conservative lens that a lot of scholars, including myself, I'm in this boat as well. That Central Asia is a conservative region, and that nationalizing ideologies are oppressive and reinforce traditional values. So as we can see, it's a lot more complex than that, and we see a diversity of practices and social mores in Kazakhstan. And finally, this could contribute, this research, if it turns into a full-on research, could contribute to studies of authoritarian rule overall in general in political science. So I'll stop here and I will be happy to answer questions and discuss with you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a few questions from Ishikoja, and probably we will start with them. Then I also have a few questions, and I guess we will have a few questions more. So Ishikoja, would you like to ask a question?
Thanks, Hélène. This was a really, thought-provoking talk. As I was thinking my own readings, although mine is more like policy related issues, but you have to know the society. And I always thought, like living there for a while too, that Kazakhstan is not really like what we can call as a conservative, Islamic country. Like things can change quite fast in the way they adapt, and I think they're very flexible in that sense. And so my two questions is actually, maybe I'll ask the second one I put here, but I'm not sure like if we can purely define Kazakhstan as a patriarchal society. I'm kind of like in terms of gender's role and female role, I kind of sense that there are elements of and not matriarchal either, but it's maybe a blend of both. Maybe that's my misinterpretation. And the second is about the condition. This may not be related of the LGBT movements in Kazakhstan. I know that in Russia, for example, despite its Christianity, although they say Christian values have church has a problem with it, but they're really not happy about those. So is there anything discussion, or are there like female sex workers serving for female? I mean, I'm just to make the issue more interesting. Anyways, thank you.
Because you asked about LGBT, may I just add some small comment and question so you can answer in just one answer? We don't need a second one. If we are talking about LGBT, how it's pursued in Kazakhstan, because like in post-Soviet countries is definitely seen in the rest of post-Soviet countries, I mean, it's definitely seen as like Western values that tried to by somehow in conflict with our society, traditional society. So is it seen still as something Western that we have to fight with? Like just my comment for the Shikoja's question. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I briefly mentioned low tolerance for homosexuality in Kazakhstan, and yeah, you're right. I have this little research here made by the Friedrich Erbe Foundation in Kazakhstan, and they had a survey there saying that. So we see the people that. The kind of the less like the how to say this intelligently. So when asked the question, what kind of people you would not want to have as neighbors, the first answer is narkomani, so drug addicts, and the second one is homosexuals. I mean LGBTQ people. So that's the second category of people that people don't want to have as neighbors. And the most tolerant people are the oldest people. So that fits into the VSSR 600. So it's like, don't ask, don't tell. I don't care about that. So that was interesting. But the young people were more intolerant than the older people. I'm talking 65 plus. So that's quite something. And yeah, I was also I didn't include it in my presentation, but it's something I have thought about because Kazakhstan decriminalized homosexuality. After independence. It is still, if I think I'm correct, but it's still a crime in Uzbekistan, for instance. So you can be prosecuted criminally for being homosexual. It's not the case in Kazakhstan. So it's decriminalized, obviously. The Russian law on sort of LGBTQ propaganda, right, that was adopted a few years ago. Kazakhstan attempted to adopt this law almost at the same time, but the Constitutional Court blocked it. So that's quite interesting to see that Kazakhstan does not have a law that forbids LGBTQ propaganda, as they call it, as some people call it. So that's quite interesting. Again, a bit of an outlier in the region in that sense. But I mean, yeah, representatives of LGBTQ communities suffer a lot of discrimination and intolerance, that's for sure. But there are some groups that are quite active, especially in Almaty. In Nur-Sultan, not so much. But there are some laws in Kazakhstan that restrict the rights of LGBTQ people for serving in the army, for instance. So there is some legal discrimination going on there, but not to the extent that we see in other countries around.
Okay.
Also, I had made another question that about the patriarchal structure of the,
yeah.
I don't know.
I think it really depends on the region. I think in Kazakhstan and elsewhere in the region, there's a strong rural and urban divide. And indeed, when I did my first fieldwork in Central Asia, in Tajikistan, and when I moved to Kazakhstan for the first time, I was so shocked of how different it was, especially in Nur-Sultan, which looks like any metropolis around the world. No, I mean, it's quite spectacular. Not all big cities look like that, but yeah, so I think you're right in a way, and I think the numbers show it. The tolerance for casual sex is much higher in Kazakhstan than in Tajikistan or other countries. But at the same time, there are things that are not visible that are happening in the households. Domestic violence is quite prevalent in Kazakhstan. This is a big issue that is being discussed quite a lot recently. And indeed, in terms of gender equality, Kazakhstan is actually in the gender inequality index is not doing so bad. But at the same time, there is more female poverty, more domestic violence, and so yeah, it depends on what we are looking at. But in terms of female employment, Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries are doing very well in comparison to Brazil or Algeria, for instance. Yeah.
Thank you for your great presentation and your responses, Hélène. Thanks.
Okay, may I have the second question? You mentioned about this the phenomena of tokal, and I mean this is something that I saw in different, especially let's say traditional societies. It's not really traditional, but anyway. And I just wondering, because this phenomena actually shows the I mean, this factor, it shows the gender roles in the society. Because sometimes what I notice in, for example, it also can be for Chechnya, let's say, or some part of traditional Russia. So for male to have this tokal, it's actually quite a status. So it's something prestigious. Like, but when we turn to female, it's vice versa. It's something that they try to keep secret. So man, in spite, I mean, he can be married officially. He always tries to talk about this with pride, and everyone knows this because it's a way to be proud because he's so rich or whatever. And for female, it's vice versa. I mean, what about Kazakhstan? Is it same way, same stuff preserved in the society? Shame for women and proud for men?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, again, for the people in power who are quite powerful and very rich, it might be a matter of boosting their prestige. That they can afford, right? Having multiple wives, so it shows their prestige. But the ordinary people I interviewed, it wasn't the case. And they were middle-class people. One of them claimed to be wealthy. And I have no way to prove that, but he seemed like he was an entrepreneur and had a good financial situation. But he was hiding it from other people. It was not something he used to boast his image. On the contrary, only his close relatives. Normally, for ordinary people, this is not the reason why they do it. For rich people, I guess they can, and then it looks good if they do. For men, of course. For women, well, this is, again, for ordinary people, this was not something that they would openly discuss with everybody. They would try to hide this because they are afraid of judgments, either first wives or second wives. I haven't interviewed many first wives, and of course for them, as for everyone who is in a relationship, when your partner finds someone else, it's humiliating, it's enraging, and especially in the case if this person is much younger, the new woman is much younger, so it can be quite humiliating. I've interviewed a woman from the south of Kazakhstan. She was a first wife, and she was only 24 years old, and her husband was her age, and he already at 24 years old found a second wife who was actually older than him by 1 or 2 years. But the first wife was completely humiliated by this, and even the second wife moved in with them, which is unusual. Usually they live separately. And she was almost having a nervous breakdown, but in the end she said, she helps us at home and then I can pursue my studies because she's here, so she's helping me somehow. So she was trying to find some advantages in this, but yeah, for first wives, I believe this is quite humiliating.
Okay, is it always a religious marriage or just like a status of lover, любовница in, we call it in Russian, or it's always, I mean, to be a tokal, you need to have this religious marriage?
Yeah, most people do the nikah, the religious marriage, yeah. But not everyone, but this is one question that I ask in my focus groups and in the interviews. What is the difference between a tokal and a любовница, a mistress? And they said, well, tokal is when it's official, but by official, they mean religious marriage, nikah. So it's officially unofficial. So yeah. And they said when there are children, because most of the people I interviewed, the second wives I interviewed, they had children with their new partner. They were the second wives had children. So often people would define a legitimate tokal by someone you have a family with.
And what about the surname of these children? I mean, do this person gives a surname? I mean, the husband gives a surname to the children, or how it works? Because I mean, officially, can it be?
I think it can be, paternity can be recognized outside marriage anyway. So, but I think most children were were given the name of their mother, not their father.
Okay.
But paternity could still be recognized.
Okay, I have a few questions more, but I will leave them at the end because we have much questions from the audience. Turgut Hocam, I guess you have a few questions, so you're the next.
Yeah, thank you very much. But please tell me if my voice is not good. It's good now? All right. So actually, I'm not a reader of gender studies, so I don't know this literature. Therefore, my question may not be very clever, but you said the divorce rates in Kazakhstan is 35%, and it sounded me quite high. I don't know how it is in other countries, in European countries or in other Central Asian countries. I have no idea about it. But could you please give us some figures about the divorce rates in the other countries in Central Asia or other European post-Soviet countries or European countries? And what do you think about this high divorce rate? If it is high, anyways, as I said, I don't know about this issue, but yeah, I would like to hear your opinion about these divorces.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's quite high. You're right, but I think when I conducted research in Tajikistan, I was also surprised by the high rate of divorce in Tajikistan, which is considered more socially conservative than Kazakhstan, for instance. So these numbers are surprising, and I think they are connected to, well, first, as I mentioned, the influence of in-laws, of relatives, which is problematic. And they're connected to the fact that people marry quite young in Central Asia. Early, some of our students are married in their early 20s. I was surprised, one student who was 23, she said, oh, I have to go to the kindergarten and get my kids. And I didn't expect my students to be married. I mean, our students is studying, obviously, undergrad, so they might wait to get married, but people marry early, and that might be one explanation as to why divorce rates are so high. And so that's one thing, the in-laws. But I think I've read recently that the number of divorces was actually increasing in Tajikistan also during the pandemic. And yeah, they are comparable to Western societies, I think. I'm from Canada, and we see very high divorce rates. I mean, I'm from Quebec, and in Quebec, people marry less officially. Yeah, they're partners instead. They have a legal status of partners. So divorce rate is not really a thing that we can measure because of that. But I would be curious about Turkey. What, if you know, what are the divorce rates in Turkey?
Actually, I don't know, but I'm sure it's not 35%. I mean, yeah. I mean, even if people have unhappy marriages, I mean, they would continue being married, even if it is not a happy one. But this is just, let's say, my idea. As I said, I don't read the literature on gender issues, so this is just a idea.
I may have an addition to this. This may be related, relevant in the Kyrgyzstan case. As far as I know, like they have the thing that call it kiss kuyu, like the kidnapping of women, and I think it's like still a very live. I mean, I don't know, at least at the time, tradition. I mean, you're basically, women can be kidnapped by, I mean, in Turkey too, I think this happens, but kind of like the partners know each other and there's kind of an arrangement between them. But in this case, like you basically, I mean, just kidnap a women on the street and without, and then a lot of these people later get a divorce, and or if they can, I mean, if their conditions are available. I think, I mean, it's just, I just read a few articles about that. Maybe in Kazakhstan, I'm not sure if it's that permanent, but I mean, that prominent. But...
Yeah, you are correct. There was a story yesterday in the news in Kyrgyzstan. One woman, a young woman, was kidnapped in plain sight during the day. It was filmed, and she was taking. So they had the car number. They found her dead. This happened just yesterday. And bride kidnapping is very common in Kyrgyzstan, and it's very problematic. It's illegal, of course, but people still do it. In Kazakhstan, it happens, but it's not to the extent of Kyrgyzstan. This is a quite marginal phenomenon in Kazakhstan. It's also illegal to do it. And I know, yeah, you're right that some people do a consensual kidnapping. So I have one student who came up to me once. He said, "I'm late for my paper because my cousin was kidnapped." And I was really panicking. And he said, "No, it was consensual kidnapping." So young people can do it to override the decision of parents, the decision of their parents because the parents don't approve of their marriage, so they do it. But that's not very common.
May I have one more question about this issue? What's the perception of women who is diverse? I mean, are there any negative perceptions about a woman who has divorced from her husband? Are there any negative perceptions about this woman?
I think the taboo is, divorce doesn't seem to be a big taboo. I think most parents would disapprove of their children divorcing, but at the same time, I don't think women and men who are divorcees suffer some kind of prejudices. And that might explain as well the high rate of divorces, because it's not really a taboo. It's more a taboo to not get married. People, women especially, would be judged harshly if they're never married and don't have children. That's even a higher taboo. So not getting married, not having children will ostracize you more than being divorced, definitely.
Thank you. We have a few questions more from our audience. Nadia Golochoğlu, if you would like to read your questions, so please, the microphone is yours.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Hélène, for this amazing talk. It was very insightful. I think Julia already mentioned it about the case of the children. Would there be a conflict between the legitimate and illegitimate or beta children in terms of like inheritance or other rights?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for your question. Yeah, I think it's problematic, definitely. And when I conducted my interviews, I didn't focus so much on children, but this is in the focus groups, this is something that people were concerned about. And that's one of the reasons why people would be willing to support the legalization of polygyny, because it would protect children. But as I said, paternity can still be recognized. So I interviewed one woman, very young woman, 21 years old, who married a 50-year-old something guy who was very rich. And he already had grown-up children, her age, basically, or older. And he died. And he actually killed himself. Which it was a very dramatic interview. He killed himself, and she didn't know. Of course, she didn't know of his intentions. But when his older children, contacted her, and she was in the will, for instance. So that's one instance where I know for sure that the children, or the child in that case, received inheritance. So the father made sure that his newborn child would be in his will. But for others, I think, this is definitely an issue that should be discussed between partners. But the problem is that sometimes even monogamous relationships don't lead to, it's very hard. There's a struggle. Women in Kazakhstan are struggling a lot to receive alimonies. And this happens in monogamous families. So the same problems will be repeated the same problems that we see in monogamous families will happen in polygynous families as well.
Maybe just a follow-up question. Is it more often that this happens in polygamy families or in monogamous families?
What exactly, the inheritance laws?
Any issues, any family related issues, basically. Is there a correlation whatsoever, or did you not find any?
To my knowledge, I would say, I think, the people I interviewed, the men seem very involved and interested in taking care of their children as much as they could, because they have to separate their times between two families. But sometimes they have older children, and then they have the time to take care of their young children. But from the people I interviewed, it didn't seem to be an issue for them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And our next question is from Eleanor Valentin, I guess. Can you read your question if you would like so?
Sure. Hi, thank you. I found this talk absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. I'm just wondering if a couple of things. Is there an increased incident of domestic violence in polygamous families? And what happens if the tokal, the second wife, wants to divorce, wants out of that relationship? If there's no legal basis for the relationship, can she just opt out? How does that relationship end?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good questions. Well, like I said, domestic violence is really prevalent in Kazakhstan. Every year, 400 women in Kazakhstan, 4 Kazakhstani women die of domestic violence. So it's quite a lot in proportion of the population. So that's very problematic. And I would say, I don't know. Yeah, I cannot answer your question with certainty. I don't think it's more prevalent, and I think it's just prevalent in general. And if it's more prevalent in polygynous relationships, then it's not as often because they're not always with their partner. So I mean, that's might be a positive aspect of it, but at the same time, like I mentioned, the second wives, they felt quite independent. The ones I interviewed, at least, they were like, some of them had very strong characters, and they said, I don't want him to be over me all the time and watching everything I do. So I would say these are the kind of women who would probably not tolerate domestic violence. I don't know for sure. But yeah, at the same time, if it's happening, then it's not constant because they don't see each other that often. And as for divorce, I think if they have nikah, then they can also sort of do an Islamic divorce, which is quite easy actually in Islam. So, but yeah, if they don't have any pre-arrangements about alimonies, it might be problematic for them to leave this relationship, just like a lot of monogamous families. A lot of women who want to divorce probably will not do it because of money issues. But yeah, so it would be to break the Islamic vows. And then I say that, but again, I want to re-emphasize that the people I interviewed, they were not particularly religious. And one of them, they said, no, we didn't go to the mosque, but he considered still that she was his second wife, is Tokal. And yeah, and that man in particular, who did not do a religious ceremony, he is the only one who said, I asked him if he was financially supporting his second wife, and he said, no, she supports me. She has more money. I drive a Toyota and she drives a Mercedes. So this was quite interesting as well.
Very, very, thank you. Thank you.
Maybe that kind of explains how or why Kazakhstan is not really that patriarchal. Could be considered as patriarchal? No, probably not, but a mix.
But at the same time, I'd like to tell another story that, so one of the women I interviewed, who was one of those very independent women, she met her husband by chance on the street. She was never married, but she had a child, and they fell in love, and they live in the south, in Taras, which is considered more conservative, and she kept presenting herself as very independent, Russian speaking, to differentiate herself from Kazakh speaking people who are more likely to be conservative. And then she said that she met with his parents. He was not married ever. She met with his parents, and she said, as soon as I stepped inside, I knew they hated me because she was not the kind of Killian that they would want to take care of them, because he was going to live with them. So so she said, I will not be your family's uborщица. Uborщица means your cleaner. I will not be your family's cleaner. So I cannot marry you. I would be so unhappy if I would do this. So then he insisted. He really loved her, and then he said, okay, I will find another wife for my parents. So what they did is that they found someone from a poor family who agreed to marry him and stay with his parents. So yeah, we need to nuance a lot, because when we say that women are the patriarchal norms don't apply, in that case it really does, because this younger woman was basically used for serving the parents. So this family had a dual model of relationships. So one with a very emancipated woman, and the other with a woman who was a victim of patriarchal norms.
Yeah. So
And
you
really
have
domestic
pretty both.
servitude.
Yeah, domestic servitude. Yeah, there are cases in Kyrgyzstan as well that couples are looking for second wives as helpers, basically.
Sure. Well, in Turkey, they used to have this tradition. They would adopt children to use them as babysitters. And I mean, this was a tradition, and to clean their houses. Maybe in some places still, and it's a very sad situation, but yeah, really rich families would, and they would think, you know, it's a good thing for them too, you know, they have a nice home, but they would basically use them as like babysitters, or, you know, to help with the housework and that kind of stuff. It's weird.
We don't have questions in the chat sections, but I still have some of my questions that I took notes during your presentation. I'm wondering about the inter-ethnic marriages, because I mean, we know that generally in Kazakhstan there is like huge, let's say, Russian diaspora or Russian-speaking diaspora. And what about the inter-ethnic marriages, especially with like Slavic or Russian people? Both, because sometimes I don't know, especially for example in Crimea, it's acceptable when Crimean Tatar man marries a Russian woman, but not vice versa when a Crimean Tatar woman marries, let's say, a Russian guy. So what about the ethnic marriages in Kazakhstan? And also same question about Tokal. I mean, how do they perceived if it's like Kazakhstani, a Kazakh, yeah, girl is Tokal, or when it's Russian? I mean, is there any difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, inter-ethnic marriages are a bit controversial in Kazakhstan. I have an anecdote that was reported to me by one of my students, and she heard it from one professor in our university who passed away a couple of years ago, a sociologist. And she was having a conversation in the train with a Kazakh family, and the parents were saying they had one daughter, one son, and they said, "Oh, I would like my daughter to marry a foreigner." Because he will take care of her, she will not be the cleaner in the house, etc. But they wish their son to marry a Kazakh girl, so that the Kazakh girl would take care of them. So that was very sad, actually, and funny in a way. But inter-ethnic marriages can be something that people wish for different reasons. I'm not sure this is representative of what people think in Kazakhstan, but this this is one quite a funny example. But in my research, I've interviewed only Kazakhs, not really Russians, although my informants mentioned friends of them who were of Russian descent, who were involved in relationships with inter-ethnic relationships. So I think one of the questions I asked in my survey as well, there were multiple questions. So one of them is it okay for a non-Muslim man to take a second wife? And the difference was not very high. For a lot of people, it was as acceptable as for a Muslim man to take a second wife. So people didn't really make the distinction between, again, it shows that it's not really a religious issue in that. So that's one thing. The other is that I think Russian second wives would be perceived more as mistresses than Tokal, because it's not part of their culture. So people are more likely to think that, yeah, Russian women are not second wives, but lovers, basically. What else? Yeah, I think that pretty much.
What about these sex workers? You mentioned that you researched these websites and I mean, made some research there. What about the inter-ethnic sex workers? I mean, is there any like differences or, I don't know, preferences? Because
hello. Yeah, actually, yeah, it was quite interesting to see that the demography of sex workers reflects the demography in Kazakhstan, demographic statistics in Kazakhstan. So yeah, they were, all ethnicities were represented. And there's actually two Kazakhstani scholars have made a research from the same website, but a statistical research, a quantitative analysis. And they found that métis, so there's a category, people can self-identify in their, they need to mention, this is one of the mandatory category actually to specify your nationality. I mean, this is something that is quite interesting all around the region, where your nationality is actually written in your passport. Someone coming from Canada, this was quite surprising to me, that this is an official identity that you have, and it's reflected even on the website. And the research conducted by those two Kazakhstani scholars, Tuluelov and Aygazin, they found that métis charge higher prices. So those who identify as métis, so we can suppose that they are more sought after people who have mixed ethnicity.
Thank you. Turgut Hoca had a question.
Thank you very much. So from the figures you shared, the statistical figures you shared, Kazakhstan seems to be out of type in the region with respect to gender issues. And what could be the reason of this difference of Kazakhstan? I mean, Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries are all predominantly Muslim. They are Turkic countries. They are post-Soviet countries. I mean, they have many similarities, but Kazakhstan is kind of an outsider, let's say. So what can be the reason of that? Can the Slavic or Russian minority in the north be a reason of that, or what, actually?
Yeah, I also ask myself this question, why is Kazakhstan so different? I think there are multiple reasons. I think the first sort of Soviet experience, where Russian culture was very dominant in Kazakhstan. So, and that's the legacy of the USSR. So Russian culture being more dominant. And so patterns of gender relations were very much influenced by that. Probably sexual habits, for instance, can be connected to that. Second reason is that Kazakhstanis have more money. They have a higher level of development, which allows them to live more independent lives, and they travel more. So I think the level of economic development is quite the most, I wouldn't say the most, but a very significant factor here. If you look at Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where people live in multiple households, and they cannot sort of enjoy leisure as much as Kazakhstanis can, and the level of freedom, economic and social freedom that they enjoy is not comparable to Kazakhstanis. So I think, especially, when you think sex workers, it's relatively cheap according to international standards, but it's still, you have to pay for that in Kazakhstan, and people obviously do. So yeah, I mean, prostitution exists everywhere, even in poor countries, but the fact that Kazakhstani women in Kazakhstan actually pay for that says something about financial independence of women in Kazakhstan, I think, and that's probably why it's happening more in there than in the rest of the region.
Thank you.
Okay. I will check the questions. I guess we don't have any questions from the audience. By the way, if you still have questions, at least let us know, because otherwise we can finish soon. Maybe, I mean, if there is no question, I will ask the last one from my list, and it's about actually, it was very interesting because at the beginning you gave this very short information about the Soviet legacy. And by the way, when I saw your presentation title in the list of our seminars, first that came to my mind is exactly that Soviet proverb about, that there is no sex in USSR. I was like, oh my God, yeah. First, really, it was first that comes to my mind. But I mean, generally, when I try to check the researches about the Soviet, let's say, feminism or some kind of that. I mean, there are a lot of researchers that stresses that in during the Soviet Union, it was emancipation, especially focusing on Central Asia. I mean, I don't know why, but I mean, kind of that Soviet time was the glorious time of emancipation in Central Asia women. But at the same time, there are another type of researchers that say it's kind of fake emancipation, because I mean, it's maybe emancipation that they started to work same as a man, but the rest, the gender, their position in the society was not there really. I mean, we cannot talk about equality at all. So how it's really changed from that time of Soviet Union during the independence? Can we say that, because in Soviet Union, as far as I understood from the researchers, there is on the one side, okay, women can work and women must work, but at the same time, all the domestic stuff are their responsibility. So is there any changes in post-Soviet Kazakhstan, or it's still same stuff about the gender roles in, I mean, in general in Kazakhstan?
Yeah. Actually, we have an issue. I have co-edited an issue. It's not out yet. It's under peer review now, but with Svetlana Pleshkova, an anthropologist, so gender issues in Central Asia. And there were quite a lot of articles addressing issues of the Soviet emancipation project as something that definitely transformed gender norms in Kazakhstan, because, well, there was a forced unveiling, which was probably quite traumatic, forced unveiling of women in Central Asia, and their active recruitment into the communist efforts, right, into the socialist dream. And women indeed were very active in the workforce and represented in various professions, but not so much in the high levels of power. And it's still the case today, I would say. The participation of women in the workforce in Kazakhstan is very high, comparable to Canada or the United States. But it's true at the same time, the division, what I believe she's a Turkish scholar, Deniz Kandiyoti, has written this very interesting book about the Soviet paradox of gender, where she says that it's a paradox because we have emancipation in the public space, but we have an unchanged division of labor at home. And it's still the case in Kazakhstan today and in many Central Asian countries where the role of the kelin, right? So Kuday Bergenova has written about that as well. Very interesting, the kelin project, I think. So this is something that it's still valid today, not in every household, of course. And again, we have to make a distinction between urban and rural divide. But yeah, recently in my students, I am teaching a class on politics of Kazakhstan, and I've made them watch a movie. It's a comedy, and it's called Kelin Тоже Человек. So Kelin is also a human, a person. So and it's a comedy, but it reflects a lot of realities of families today in Kazakhstan, where the Kelin, the bride, is responsible for a lot of things that works, and there's no division of labor. So yeah, but again, I think yeah, it depends on the region, but I think the feminist movement in Kazakhstan is pretty strong. In Almaty, you have a lot of organizations that aim to change this. Yeah, this division of labor, the definition of gender norms in Kazakhstan. But it's true if we take Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, for example, they have had the strongest re-traditionalization of their societies, and these are also the poorest countries. So again, I think the economic situation in Kazakhstan is favorable to women to an extent, whereas in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, women are really, not all women, but many women are sort of victims of very strong traditional values, so-called traditional values, and they have lost some of their, how to say that, some of the gains that they have made in the past.
I mean, if I may add something, I think the Soviet legacy had both, advantages. I mean, the emancipation of women was, in a sense, was quite, I think, benefiting for Muslim Central Asian women in some respects. And I mean, they already have like the pre-Islamic tradition. This is often discussed like among Turks, the women's role, etc. But even with the institutional religion, basically in not only Islam and Christianity and other religions too, kind of like the church moved the women, out of the game, and like it's true everywhere, like the patriarchy. But I think in that sense, Central Asians are, due to Soviet legacy, I think it has some benefits. But for example, that I remember either it was a movie or documentary about the abortion was used as almost like a birth control family planning method during all the Soviet Union, and that's like unbelievably dangerous for female health. I mean, it's not like, you can be pro-choice, you can be, you may want to have abortion, whatever, but it's almost like they have no other choice, it looked like. And so those kind of problems, I guess, exist. I don't know if they are still there. I hope not, but they hopefully have other options of family planning. But
yeah, this is another interesting aspect, is that in many societies, abortion is considered a controversial issue, right? Even in Canada, the Conservative Party of Canada wants to reopen the debate, and not the entire party, but a fraction of the party. So it's not a done deal. It's still quite controversial. But in Central Asia, because of the Soviet legacy, it seems that it's not a controversial issue. So that's another aspect of the law that is quite surprising. Hopefully but there's no sex education whatsoever in Kazakhstan. And there are people who are working on that to include in the curriculum, because people have sex outside marriage, young people, and they're not really aware of how contraception works. So this is a challenge indeed.
Sure, I guess in all our societies. Thank you so much. I think it was a very great discussion. I think we told a lot about in other countries as well, with the case of Kazakhstan and the issues there.
Okay. So because we don't have any more questions, so I guess we can finish. And it was a great presentation, great discussion. So I hope we will have more these, not just political discussions, but also the social and gender discussions. I mean, for me personally, it's, I mean, the most interesting topic for the research, I guess. So thank you very much. And I hope to read your paper that you announced is in printing. We will enjoy
the book.
Not to mention, actually, one of my only book, the only book I've published, Transforming Tajikistan, which is based on my dissertation, will be published in Turkish this year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I forgot to mention.
Oh, that's great. Remember
can you tell us the name?
Company, so, or yeah, maybe we'll share it with us later.
I will.
You should invite Dr. Hélène Thibault when
I should write her
like a
website.
book launch.
Book launch, yeah. Second book launch.
Yeah. Oh no, maybe there is no point, right?
Okay.
Like the website.
It would be great. Yeah, so you see, so just with Exprompt, we found another seminar.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I cannot speak Turkish to the audience, so
we'll translate it for you. We'll do the translation.
All right.
Okay, that was great. Thanks for joining us tonight, and for everyone too. For those of you who joined us, it was great to have you all. Until next time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this talk. It was very interesting.
Thanks for attending. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm closing the session.
Yeah,
have a nice day.
Bye-bye.